My name is Walter. 69 years old on paper, 79 in my knees, and a lifetime's worth of stories in my back pocket. I live alone now, in a little blue house at the corner of Maple and Third, the one with the crooked mailbox and the pecan tree that keeps dropping nuts like it's trying to bury me alive. Every morning I drink my coffee, feed my cat Pumpkin, and wait for my son Ethan to call. He doesn't call often, but when he does, I still feel like a dad. Last Tuesday evening, I was rinsing my cup when my phone buzzed. A voice message from Ethan. Finally, I muttered, smiling. Maybe he'd sent another clip of my grandson trying to whistle. That boy's got lungs, but no tune. I pressed play. At first, just road noise. Then Ethan's voice low, tired, serious. I'll drop Dad at the house and head back. Don't worry, Mads. He won't be with us long. He's just a burden. The cup slipped from my hand and hit the sink. Didn't break, but I almost did. For a minute, I just stood there, frozen. Then I saw the caption under the message. To Madison. He'd sent it to me by mistake. I replayed it 3 times. Same words, same tone. My son, my own boy, talking about me like I was a bag of trash he needed to take out. I sat back down, heart pounding. Pumpkin jumped onto my lap, looking at me like she knew. I stroked her fur and whispered, "Guess your old man finally overstayed his welcome." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall, both of them sounding too loud for comfort. By morning, the hurt turned into something else. Something colder, steadier. I wasn't going to shout or cry. No, sir. I was going to do something my son would never, ever expect. Because when a man calls his father a burden, he forgets one thing who taught him how to carry the load in the first place. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Puffy eyes, wrinkled cheeks, and a nose that somehow looked older than the rest of me. "Well, Walt," I muttered, "you've officially become the sad old guy in those retirement commercials." I tried to shave, but the razor slipped, cut my chin, and Pumpkin meowed like she was mocking me. I stuck a Band-Aid on, crooked as my life, and poured myself coffee so strong it could wake the dead. As I sat at the kitchen table, Ethan's words played again in my head. He's just a burden. Funny thing, I used to carry that boy on my shoulders to Little League practice. He'd fall asleep halfway home, drooling on my head, and I'd still walk the extra mile just so he wouldn't wake up tired. A burden, huh? Maybe he should check the dictionary. By 9 a.m., my neighbor Doris was already outside, watering her plastic flowers. She waved at me with a look that said she smelled gossip coming. "Morning, Walter. You look pale. You eat anything funny?" I smiled. "Just my pride, Doris. It's a little tough to chew." She blinked. "Is that oatmeal?" "Metaphor, Doris. It's a metaphor." I went back inside, grabbed my old suitcase, and started packing. A few shirts, my lucky socks, the photo of my late wife, Martha, and the house deed. The paper felt heavy, like it knew it was about to make trouble. I called my old buddy Frank, retired lawyer, part-time fishing philosopher, and full-time coffee addict. "Frank," I said, "remember when you told me revenge tastes better with a legal signature?" He chuckled. "Walter, what did your son do this time?" "Oh, nothing too fancy," I said. "Just called me a burden and accidentally sent me the evidence." "Ah," he said, "the classic self-incrimination move. I'll bring donuts." I hung up smiling. Not because I was happy, but because I was finally calm. And that kind of calm scares people a lot more than anger. Tomorrow morning, Ethan was going to wake up and realize the burden could walk, talk, and sign documents faster than he ever imagined. When you're old, people think you're predictable, that you'll just sit quietly, sip your tea, and forgive everyone before breakfast. Well, not this time. That morning, I stood in my front yard with my suitcase, the air still smelling like rain and regret. Ethan pulled into the driveway, his shiny SUV humming like it had better things to do. He rolled down the window, sunglasses on, voice dripping with fake warmth. "Morning, Dad. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Dreamt I was a burden." Hard to rest when you're one of those. His face froze for half a second. He knew. Oh, he knew. But instead of apologizing, he gave me that corporate smile of his, the kind that says, "Please don't ruin my day." "Dad, about that message. That was taken out of context." "Sure," I said. "You meant to call me a blessing, but the phone autocorrected it to burden. Happens all the time." Madison came out, holding her smoothie like it was a trophy. "Good morning, Walter," she chirped, all sunshine and guilt. I smiled. "Morning, Madison. Don't worry, I'm leaving before I overstay my welcome. Wouldn't want to weigh you two down." She blinked. "Oh no, you're not already packed," I said. "You two can have the house to yourselves." Ethan looked confused. "Dad, this is your house." "Was," I corrected, "until about 5 minutes ago." I held up an envelope, the deed, neatly folded, signed, and notarized. "Frank helped me update a few things last night." "What things?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. "Oh, nothing major," I said, trying not to laugh. "Just made sure my burden would be someone else's problem." He frowned. "Dad, that's not funny." I grinned. "Oh, I wasn't trying to be funny. That's just a bonus." I tossed my suitcase in the trunk of Frank's car when he pulled up, waving his donut like a victory flag. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out, which was impressive, considering how much that boy loves to talk. As we drove away, I turned back and saw him still standing in the driveway, looking like a man who'd just realized his GPS doesn't work anymore. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old, I felt alive. But the real fun? That was just getting started. Frank's car smelled like victory and old leather. He always kept a bag of powdered donuts on the dashboard, which made every bump on the road look like we were driving through a sugar storm. "You sure about this, Walt?" he asked, his mouth already full. "This isn't some small prank. You're flipping the whole family tree upside down." I took a sip from my thermos black coffee. "No sugar." "Frank, when your own son calls you a burden, the tree was already upside down. I'm just shaking off the rotten apples." We stopped by the diner on 5th Street, the one where waitresses have been calling me sweetheart since Nixon was in office. Nancy, the morning waitress, took one look at me and said, "You look like you're about to commit a federal crime, Walter." "Close," I said. "Just a family reorganization." Frank nearly choked on his donut. While we ate, I laid out the plan. "Remember how Ethan said he'd take care of the property taxes for me this year?" Frank nodded. "Yep, you said it made you proud." "Well," I said, "he didn't. Turns out the only thing he took care of was himself. So, last night I transferred ownership of the house to the town's senior charity trust. You know, the one that runs the Veterans Garden and the community buses?" Frank's eyes went wide. "You gave it away?" "Not gave," I corrected. "Donated. In memory of my late wife. She'd always said she wanted her home to keep giving. Now it will." He stared at me for a while, then burst out laughing. "You old fox. Your son's gonna wake up thinking he inherited a house, and instead he's got a tax receipt and a moral lesson." "Exactly," I said, smiling. "Best kind of inheritance. One that humbles you." Outside, the morning sun hit the diner windows just right, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the background character in my own story. I was the lead again, slightly limping, maybe, but leading. As we walked to the car, Nancy yelled after us, "Walter, you forgot your change!" I turned and said, "Keep it, sweetheart. Consider it a tip for reminding me I'm still worth something." Frank patted my shoulder as we got in. "So, what's next?" I looked out at the road ahead, the town waking up, the smell of coffee in the air. "Next? I go see my son and tell him breakfast's on me, because I just served him a full plate of consequences." When we pulled up in front of Ethan's place later that afternoon, Frank looked like he was about to watch a fireworks show. "You sure you don't want me to record this, Walt? For legal or comedic purposes?" I sighed. "Frank, I'm not going in to fight. I'm going in to educate. Big difference. One makes noise, the other makes history." Madison opened the door before I even knocked. She had that tight smile women wear when they're about to deliver bad news but still want to look polite. "Walter, we didn't expect you back so soon." "Neither did I said. Turns out life's full of surprises like voice messages you weren't meant to hear. Her face drained faster than my old coffee maker. Ethan appeared behind her, hair messy, eyes wide. Dad, listen. Oh, I did, I said. Every word. Frank leaned on the mailbox, munching on another donut like he was watching a soap opera. Ethan tried to play it calm. Dad, you're blowing this out of proportion. You know I didn't mean it like that. I folded my arms. Son, if you accidentally stab someone, it still counts. Intentions don't fix the wound. He ran a hand through his hair. Okay, fine. I was frustrated. You can't just show up unannounced anymore. It's hard having you around sometimes. I smiled. Well, lucky for you, you won't have to worry about that anymore. Madison blinked. What do you mean? I mean, I said, you might want to start paying rent. The house isn't ours anymore. It now belongs to the Maple County Senior Support Foundation. They'll be stopping by next week to start renovations. Ethan's jaw dropped. You what? Oh, and don't forget to forward the utility bills to the new owner, I added. They're big on punctuality. Frank couldn't hold it in any longer. He burst out laughing, powdered sugar flying everywhere. Madison looked horrified. Ethan turned the color of boiled shrimp, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Dad, Ethan said finally, voice shaking. How could you do this to me? Funny, I said. That's the same question I asked myself last night, just with the roles reversed. He stared at me, lost for words. And for once in his life, he was the one standing small. But what happened next, that part I didn't plan. I expected shouting, maybe some dramatic, "You'll regret this, Dad," kind of speech, the type you see in bad TV dramas. But instead, Ethan just stood there, blinking like a man trying to reboot. Madison, meanwhile, grabbed her phone, probably Googling, "Can your father legally donate your inheritance to charity?" Frank coughed between chuckles. Careful, Walt. You might give them both a heart attack before lunch. I smirked. They'll survive. Entitlement's a tough weed. It needs a little shock therapy. Ethan finally found his voice. Dad, you can't just give away the house. That's manipulation. Manipulation? I said. Son, if I were manipulating, I'd have left it in your name but charged rent. He looked so lost, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Madison jumped in, her voice syrupy and sharp at the same time. You can't seriously expect us to believe this is about charity. Oh, it's definitely about charity, I said. Just not the kind you think. It's about teaching generosity the hard way. Frank leaned over to me and whispered, You want me to pass her a donation box? I whispered back, only if she tries to evict me from my own story. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan sat down on the porch step. His shoulders sagged. The man looked smaller, like the air had finally left his big balloon of pride. Dad, he said quietly, I didn't mean to hurt you. I get stressed. The kids, the bills, the mortgage. I say stupid things. I looked at him for a long moment. You don't say, son. You send them too. He cracked the faintest smile. Madison didn't. The wind picked up, blowing one of Frank's donut napkins onto the porch, and for a second, the whole scene looked absurd, 3 grown adults arguing while a napkin danced around us like it knew more peace than we did. I sighed. Ethan, you've got a good life. You've got a wife, kids, health. Don't waste it thinking I'm your weight. I carried you long enough. Maybe it's time you learned to stand without leaning. He looked up at me with wet eyes. So, what happens now? I shrugged. Now? You two get to decide if you want to be visitors or strangers. I'll leave the door open, but it won't be my door anymore. And with that, I turned to leave, feeling something strange, not anger, not sadness, just peace. The kind of peace you get when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who stopped listening years ago. Frank held the car door open. You sure you don't want to throw in one last line for the drama? I smiled. Nah, let them sit in silence. It's the only thing they can't talk over. But little did I know that silence was about to break in the most unexpected way. 2 days passed. Peace, as it turns out. Sounds a lot like the ticking of a wall clock in an empty room. I was back, in my little blue house, or rather, the Foundation's little blue house, now waiting for the official paperwork to clear. Frank stopped by every morning with coffee and gossip, like some kind of retired Santa Claus with bad timing. "Your son called me yesterday," he said, dropping a box of pastries on the table. "Wanted to know if you'd lost your mind or just rented it out." I chuckled. "What'd you tell him?" I told him both options sounded accurate. We laughed, but when Frank left, the quiet came crawling back. I sat by the window, staring at the pecan tree outside, the same one I'd planted with Ethan when he was 6. He used to call it Dad's tree. Said it was strong, funny looking, and impossible to get rid of. Guess he wasn't wrong. That evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it expecting a delivery. Instead, there stood Ethan, no car, no suit, no Madison, just him, holding a paper bag and looking like a man who'd been arguing with his own reflection. "I brought dinner," he said quietly. "Mom's old recipe." I hesitated. "You remembered that recipe?" He nodded. "It took me 3 tries to get it right." Madison said the kitchen smells like the 80 seconds. I grinned. "Then you did it perfectly." We ate in silence for a bit. It wasn't comfortable silence, yet more like two strangers waiting for a train. Finally, he said, "Dad, I didn't mean it when I called you a burden." I wiped my mouth and looked at him. "I know, son. You just forgot what not being one looks like." He lowered his head. "I've been thinking. Maybe I relied on you more than I realized. You were always the guy who fixed things, even when you were the one broken." "Well?" I said. "You never noticed, because I was good at hiding the cracks." "That's what fathers do. We patch, we paint, we pretend it's fine." He smiled faintly, then frowned. "So you really gave the house away?" "Yep, to the Senior Foundation. They're building a small reading center here. Gonna name it after your mom." His eyes softened. "She'd like that." "Yeah," I said. "She always said books can raise kids better than most parents." Ethan let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "Dad, can I help with the renovations?" I looked at him, surprised. "You sure you want to help a burden?" He winced, then smirked. "Guess I owe that burden a hammer and a dozen apologies." We both laughed awkwardly, but it was a start. And as the night went on, I realized something. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't payback. It's turning the lesson into a bridge instead of a wall. Still, Frank wasn't going to like that part. The next morning, Frank burst through my front door like a man auditioning for a police drama. "You fed him dinner?" he shouted. "Walt, we were this close to legendary revenge status, and you went soft?" I almost choked on my toast. "Relax, Frank. I didn't go soft, I went strategic. There's a difference." He crossed his arms. "Strategic? You invited the enemy into your kitchen?" "He brought food," I said. "You don't turn away a man with lasagna and guilt." Frank slumped into a chair, muttering, "You're ruining my favorite case study in poetic justice." We sat there, him sulking, me sipping coffee, until I finally said, "Frank, revenge feels good for a day. Forgiveness lasts a bit longer, especially when it comes with free dinner." He rolled his eyes. "You're turning into a Hallmark card." I smirked. "Then at least I'm one they'd actually buy." Later that day, Ethan showed up again, this time in work boots and an old t-shirt that said "Best Dad Ever." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. "Did you raid the irony section at Walmart?" I asked. He grinned. "Hey, I figured if I'm gonna rebuild bridges, might as well look the part." We started clearing the old tool shed that would become the reading room. Every few minutes, Ethan would find something from his childhood: a broken baseball bat, an old slingshot, a faded photo of him with a missing front tooth. He held up the photo. "Mom took this the day I broke your windshield with that slingshot." I nodded. "Yep, and you lied about it for 3 years. I knew the whole time, by the way." His jaw dropped. "You did? Why didn't you say anything?" I smiled. "Because I wanted you to live with the suspense. Builds character." We laughed until our sides hurt, and for a moment, it felt like the clock had turned backward, back to when life was simpler, and forgiveness didn't need paperwork. As the sun dipped low, he wiped his hands and said quietly, "Dad, I think I forgot how to talk to you without feeling like I'm disappointing you." I leaned on my cane, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Then stop trying to impress me." Just show up. That's all fathers ever want. He nodded, eyes glassy. I'll be here tomorrow. Same time. Bring coffee, I said. Frank's been cutting mine with decaf to help my nerves. Ethan laughed, shook his head, and walked off down the street, lighter, slower, almost like a boy again. Frank poked his head out the window and groaned. So what now, St. Walter of Maple Street? I smiled. Now, we build something worth inheriting, not a house, but a story he won't forget. And for the first time in years, I realized maybe I hadn't lost my son after all. I'd just given him the map back to where he left himself. The following week, our little construction project officially began, and let me tell you, I hadn't seen that much chaos since my wife once tried to assemble an IKEA bookshelf without the manual. Ethan showed up every morning just like he promised, sometimes early, sometimes late, but always with coffee strong enough to wake up the neighborhood squirrels. Frank joined too, mostly to supervise and criticize. You two are hammering like politicians. A lot of noise, not much progress, he'd say, puffing on his donut like it was a cigar. At first, Ethan and I worked in awkward silence. Then, somewhere between sanding the walls and arguing about paint colors, we started to sound like ourselves again. He'd tease me about my retirement posture. I'd roast him for sweating like a salesman in confession. One afternoon, as we fixed the old signpost by the driveway, Ethan paused and looked at me. You know, Dad, I used to think you were impossible to please. I grinned. That's because you only ever tried when you needed money. He laughed a real laugh this time, the kind I hadn't heard in years. Then he got quiet again. When Mom passed, I think I got scared. You looked so strong, like it didn't hit you, and I didn't know how to comfort someone who wouldn't break. I put the hammer down. Son, I wasn't strong. I was pretending so you wouldn't fall apart too. He blinked, surprised. You mean you were hurting too? Oh, I was a wreck, I said. I just hid it behind bad jokes and casserole. He chuckled softly. So, we're both stubborn, emotional disasters? Exactly, I said. That's genetic excellence right there. The moment lingered, quiet but warm. Even Frank stayed silent for a whole 30 seconds, which is his personal record. By the time we finished for the day, the walls were half painted, the floors covered in sawdust, and the house smelled like coffee, sweat, and second chances. Ethan looked around and said, You know, Dad, this might be the first real thing we've built together in years. I nodded. Yep, and for once, you didn't need a user manual. He grinned. Maybe you were right. Sometimes silence does teach better than shouting. Of course I was right, I said. I'm old. It's in the job description. That night, after he left, I sat on the porch and watched the porch light flicker, like the house was smiling at me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the ending of a story. I felt like a chapter still being written, with room for laughter, forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, dessert that isn't from Frank's donut box. By the third week, the whole town knew about our father-son redemption construction project. Doris, from across the street, started bringing lemonade every afternoon, just to see if the drama was over or still marinating. She'd lean on the fence and announce weather updates like a sports commentator. Looks like forgiveness with a chance of stubbornness today. Ethan pretended not to hear, but I could tell he loved it. Every day he got a little looser, less tense, more human. The man who once called me a burden was now hauling lumber and cracking jokes like we were building an amusement park instead of a reading room. One day he showed up with a box of my old vinyl records. Found these in the attic, he said. Figured they'd make the place more daddish. I grinned. You mean cool, he snorted. Sure, if people still faint over Barry Manilow. We set up a little speaker and played one of my favorite songs, the one Martha used to hum while cooking. For a few moments, everything just paused. The sound filled the air. The light hit the dust like confetti, and I swear I could almost feel her there, smiling at us. Ethan must have felt it too. He stopped hammering and whispered, You ever miss her so much it hurts to breathe? I nodded. Every single day. But that hurt? That's proof we loved right. He looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I don't want to waste what I've got left of you, Dad. I smiled. Then stop talking and pass me the screwdriver. We worked in silence after that. The good kind this time. The kind where you don't need to fill it because it's already full. At one point, Frank walked in holding 2 buckets of paint. What's all this sentimental nonsense? We've got walls to finish. I winked at him. Frank, even walls need emotional support before the second coat. He rolled his eyes. Remind me never to retire with you 2 philosophers. By sunset, we'd painted half the room. Ethan wiped sweat off his face and said, You know, I used to think you were just lucky that everything somehow worked out for you. I laughed. Luck? Son? I've just fallen enough times to learn where the soft spots are. He nodded slowly. I guess I've been waiting for you to fail, so I'd feel better about my own mistakes. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the boy I raised, but the man I'd hoped he'd become. Congratulations, I said quietly. You just failed perfectly. Now you're ready to live. He smiled through teary eyes. You're something else, you know that? Yeah, I said, patting his shoulder. I'm the burden that keeps on teaching. We both burst out laughing loud, clumsy, and real. And for the first time in years, laughter didn't feel like pretending. It felt like home coming back. A week later, the reading room was finally finished. Fresh paint, polished floors, shelves ready for books, and a smell of new beginnings mixed with a hint of Frank's eternal donut glaze. The sign above the door read, Martha's Corner where stories never grow old. Ethan stared at it for a long while, his hands shoved in his pockets. She'd love this, he said softly. Yeah, I nodded, especially the part where her name's in bigger letters than mine. We both laughed, but underneath it was that quiet ache, the one that shows up when love turns into memory. Frank walked in with his clipboard like a man inspecting history. Not bad for 2 amateurs. You even managed to keep all your fingers, that's progress. Ethan grinned. I almost lost one yesterday. Frank pointed at me. Then you did it wrong. When Walt built the deck in '92, he lost half a thumbnail and still finished early. Legend says it grew back out of spite. I rolled my eyes. Frank, you remember that story more vividly than my son remembers my birthday. Ethan chuckled. Hey, I'm making up for it now, aren't I? Barely, I said. You're at about 2 birthdays and half a phone call behind. He smiled and walked over to the wall where we'd hung a photo of Martha, surrounded by her favorite books. He touched the frame gently, then turned to me. Dad, I think I finally get it. Get what? Why you didn't yell. Why you didn't try to make me feel small. I shrugged. You already felt small, son. You just didn't know it. Anger wouldn't have fixed that, it would have shrunk us both. He looked down, nodding. I was so focused on being successful that I forgot how to be decent. I thought being busy meant being important. I smiled. Son, people who are too busy for kindness usually end up with time for regret. We stood there in silence for a bit. Outside, kids were laughing, probably from the park nearby, and it hit me how fast life spins. 1 minute you're holding your boy's hand, teaching him to ride a bike. The next, you're teaching him how not to lose himself. Then, of course, Frank had to ruin the moment. All right, philosophers, he said, clapping his hands. Group hug or coffee break? Ethan laughed. Coffee, please. I'm still not emotionally ready for a Frank hug. You will be someday, Frank grinned. It's like trauma, but warmer. We all burst out laughing again, loud enough for Doris to peek out her window and shout, If you're celebrating, I'm bringing pie! I called back. Make it apple! And make it quick before Frank claims he baked it! That night, as the 3 of us sat under the porch light, eating Doris's pie straight from the tin, I realized something simple yet enormous. You can't choose how people love you, but you can teach them how to start again. And maybe, just maybe, that's what second chances are made of. Coffee, laughter, and a pie that's slightly burnt but shared anyway. The grand opening of Martha's Corner was set for Saturday morning, and let me tell you, half the town showed up, mostly out of curiosity to see if I'd trip during my speech. Doris came early, armed with enough pie to feed a small army. Frank wore a tie for the first time in 10 years, though it looked like he'd wrestled it into submission. And Ethan, Well, he stood beside me, straight-backed and nervous, holding a box of programs like it was the Constitution. Dad, he whispered, what if I say something stupid? I grinned. Then you'll sound like me and people love me. He rolled his eyes, but I could see the smile hiding there. The mayor gave some speech about community and legacy and how wonderful it is to see generations building together. I just stood there thinking, if only she'd heard that voicemail 3 weeks ago. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. Folks, I said, I was told to keep this short, which means I won't. The crowd laughed. That was my cue. This room used to be my wife's favorite corner. She'd sit by the window, reading books and pretending to ignore me when I talked too much, which, to be fair, was often. Now it's filled with her spirit again, and with forgiveness. I looked at Ethan. His eyes were already glassy. Families aren't perfect, I continued. They argue. They forget. They fail each other sometimes. But they also rebuild. And if you can hammer forgiveness into a wall strong enough to hold new stories, you've done something right. Applause filled the room, warm, genuine, and louder than I expected. Ethan wiped his face and whispered, You're impossible. Comes with the age, I said. So does wisdom and lower back pain. After the ribbon cutting, kids ran in with books, the smell of pie filled the air, and Frank gave a toast with orange juice like we were at a royal wedding. To Martha, he said, voice trembling slightly. And to Walter for proving old age doesn't mean you're done teaching lessons. Ethan raised his cup. 2 second chances. And to Dad, who made sure mine wasn't wasted. I raised mine too. To family, the only investment that pays back in laughter, gray hair, and heartburn. Everyone laughed. And for a few seconds, I swear I could almost feel Martha there in the light, in the laughter, in the quiet pride of knowing we'd all finally learned how to stay. That night, when everyone left, Ethan helped me clean up. He found an old photo of Martha and handed it to me. She'd be proud of you, Dad. I looked at the photo, then at him. No, son. She'd be proud of us. He smiled. Even of me? Especially of you, I said. You're living proof that even the stubborn ones can learn. It just takes a few broken hammers and a talking donut. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the picture frame. And for once, the laughter didn't echo, it stayed, right there in the room, like a promise kept. A few days after the opening, life slowed back to its normal rhythm, the kind that smells like morning coffee and old wood polish. But something had shifted in the air. Ethan started dropping by without a reason. No, I need this. No, can you fix that? Just showing up. One morning he brought donuts instead of coffee. Frank nearly fainted. Are we witnessing the second coming? He said dramatically. Ethan brought food? Ethan laughed. Don't get used to it. They were buy one, get one. I smirked. He's generous now, but only when the math works. We sat on the porch, the three of us, watching squirrels conduct what looked like a very serious nut conference under the pecan tree. Doris shouted from across the street. Walter, tell your friends the pie's cooling, Frank yelled back. Save me the corner piece, the one with 90% crust and 10% fruit. Ethan leaned back in his chair. You've got quite a fan club here, Dad. Perks of being old and charming, I said. You get respect or pity, and I use both strategically. He chuckled. You know, I used to think slowing down meant giving up. But watching you, I think it just means you finally stopped running from the wrong things. I turned to him and started walking toward the right ones. For a while, we just sat in that peaceful silence, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. Then Ethan said quietly, I listened to that voicemail again. I raised an eyebrow. You still had it? He nodded. Yeah. And this time, it sounded smaller, like a different man said it. I don't know who that guy was, but I don't want to be him again. I looked at him, really. Looked, and for the first time in decades, I didn't see the boy who needed my approval. I saw the man who'd earned my respect. That guy's gone, I said. You buried him under a layer of fresh paint and humility. He laughed softly. Well, let's hope he doesn't haunt the reading room. Please, Frank groaned, licking sugar off his fingers. If there's a ghost in there, It's probably Martha haunting Walter for putting her name next to his handwriting. I grinned. She probably is. She never trusted my penmanship, said I wrote like a chicken escaping a fox. Ethan nearly spit out his coffee, laughing. You two are impossible. That's what keeps us alive, I said. That and Doris's pie. The afternoon stretched out golden and lazy. Birds chirped. The wind hummed through the trees. And for once, my heart wasn't heavy, it was full. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you, laughing at bad jokes, eating donuts, and reminding you that peace doesn't shout, it arrives. And maybe that's what growing old really means. Learning the difference between noise and meaning, and keeping the people who know how to laugh at both. Autumn crept in slowly, the kind of quiet season that makes even the wind sound reflective. The pecan tree out front was turning gold, the air had that crisp bite, and my knees had officially started predicting rain more accurately than the weatherman. Ethan still came by most mornings. He'd bring coffee, sometimes a sandwich, and always a story about his kids, my grandkids, who were apparently discovering sarcasm faster than arithmetic. Dad, he said one morning, Charlie told his teacher he couldn't do homework because my grandpa says experience is a better teacher. I nearly choked on my toast. I told you to pass on wisdom, not excuses. Frank, without missing a beat, muttered, same thing in my book. But somewhere between the laughter and the coffee refills, I realized how much lighter life had become. The tension that once sat between us like an invisible guest was gone, replaced by something softer. Understanding, maybe? Or just mutual exhaustion from arguing. That afternoon, we walked through Martha's Corner. The place smelled of books and lemon polish. A few elderly volunteers were setting up for the weekly story hour. One of them waved at me. Mr. Walter, we're short on readers today, you free? Ethan grinned. Dad, go on. You were born to lecture. Read, I corrected. Lecturing requires disappointment. I took a seat in the old rocking chair by the window and opened a children's book about a bear who couldn't find his winter hat. My voice cracked at first, not from nerves, but from the sudden rush of memory. Martha used to read just like this, her voice soft, calm, like honey melting on warm bread. Halfway through the story, I caught Ethan standing by the doorway, arms folded, watching me with a look I hadn't seen since he was a kid. Pride, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need words. When the kids clapped at the end, I bowed dramatically, which made Frank shout, Don't get up too fast, old man, or they'll clap for CPR next! The room erupted in laughter, and even I couldn't hold it in. Later, as we locked up, Ethan said, You looked happy in there. I was, I said. It's hard not to be when you're surrounded by stories. They forgive you faster than people do. He nodded slowly. Guess we both needed a new chapter. I smiled. Maybe we just needed to stop rereading the old ones. He laughed quietly, then added, You know, I used to think you were hard to understand. That's because I am, I said. I've had 69 years to complicate myself. He rolled his eyes. And you're proud of that, aren't you? Son, I grinned. At this age, if you're not proud of your weirdness, you're just wasting good wrinkles. We walked out into the evening cool air, golden sky, a light breeze that felt like memory breathing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I just felt here. But the real surprise, the one that made my knees forget their age, came the next morning, when Ethan knocked on my door holding something that nearly broke me all over again. The next morning, I heard a knock at the door, not the polite, hesitant kind, but firm, steady, almost nervous. When I opened it, Ethan stood there holding a small wooden box, carved neatly, polished smooth. His eyes were red, but he was smiling. Morning, Dad, he said softly. I stepped aside. You look like a man who's about to confess or propose. Either way, I should probably sit down. He chuckled, then handed me the box. Open it. Inside was a small brass plaque, simple, elegant, engraved with the words, For Walter and Martha, who taught us that family isn't about blood, but about staying. I blinked, speechless for the first time in maybe 20 years. What's this for? Ethan swallowed. The board voted yesterday. They're renaming the reading room. It's no longer just Martha's Corner. He smiled. It's the Walters Library. Yours and Mom's. For both of you. I felt something shift inside me, that deep, quiet ache that lives somewhere between pride and forgiveness. For years, I thought I'd lost my family one argument at a time. But standing there, with that plaque in my trembling hands, I realized maybe I'd just been waiting for them to find their way home. I laughed, half choked, half giddy. Well, look at that, I said. I finally got my name next to hers without her crossing it out. Ethan grinned. Took you 50 years, but hey, progress. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once stared at my cold coffee the night after that awful voicemail. Only this time, the air felt lighter. Ethan pulled out 2 mugs. To us, he said, the stubborn ones who finally figured it out. I raised mine. To burdens the kind that turn out to be blessings in disguise. He laughed, but his voice cracked when he said, I don't deserve you, Dad. I looked him square in the eye. You didn't have to. You just had to come back. Outside, the wind moved through the pecan tree, slow, gentle, like a voice too soft for words. For a second, I swear I could hear Martha's laugh in it. Ethan noticed me looking out. What is it? I smiled. Nothing, son. Just a reminder that forgiveness doesn't echo. It stays. He stood up, placed the plaque on the mantel, and said quietly, She'd be proud of you, old man. I leaned back in my chair. She'd be proud of us. The men she somehow managed to fix without being here to see it. Frank barged in right then, holding his usual box of donuts. You two hugging again? Save some emotion for the weekend. Doris is bringing cheesecake. Ethan rolled his eyes. You're unbelievable. Frank smirked. No, I'm retired. We all burst out laughing, and it hit me not every story needs a grand ending. Some just need a quiet one that feels like peace. And as I looked at my son, really looked at him, I realized this was the best ending I could have ever written. Not revenge, not victory, just love finally learned. The long way around.